I want to welcome everyone to today's Friday Town Hall. This is our 12th Town Hall. We began the series in mid-March as the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic began to hit the country, and we wanted to help our members and the whole photographic community navigate its impacts. Today, in the wake of the George Floyd's murder by Minneapolis police officers and other deaths of African Americans at the hands of police, we are hosting our town hall to address the other pandemic, the pandemic of racism that has cost so many lives and ravaged communities of color, especially the Black community, over the centuries. ASMP stands in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and the protesters who have been marching for justice. We offer our full support to the movement and to our Black visual creators who, as photographers, contribute so much to our creative community. Before introducing our special guest today and I want to offer some thoughts to set the framework for today's conversation, but I also want to pause now and ask for a moment of silence in memory of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. I am grateful for the executive board's support for this town hall. I realize that today's conversation is mere drops in the ocean of thoughts, words, and deeds that must take place around the country in order to change and address the issues laid bare by these twin pandemics that have so catastrophically damaged the communities of color and individual families. I believe that the conversation today must operate on two levels. One for ASMP as an organization, and another for all of us participating as individuals. On the first level, we at ASMP recognize that we must address the needs of the community and work in partnership and collaboration with other organizations to build an allyship that gathers our resources and applies them to change our industry and the media companies so many of us serve with their own vision and skills. We need to reform the processes and structures to enable representations that promote deeper understandings among all the people in our country. The other level, I think, represents our individual work. Since birth, we have been all bombarded with social messaging that contributes to the formation of implicit individual biases that, if left unexamined, enable the systemic racism that is seen in so many of our institutions as mechanisms to reinforce denial of opportunity, equal opportunity, and equal justice, among other ills. Recognizing the role that photography plays as an instrument of media expression and the role that media plays in forming social messaging, I believe we have an opportunity to do a new kind of analysis starting here today that can inform our individual work and be the basis for the reforms that I was speaking about a minute ago. The goal of today's conversation is to create a space where we can begin a fundamental and overdue conversation about racism and its impacts on photographers, photography, and society as a whole. On the communal and individual levels, I believe our work is to engage in persistent self-examination that leads to doing continuing education work. Using those mechanisms, we can engage in the allyship that I mentioned earlier and the relationship building that reinforces our common human dignity. And by reaching to bridge across divides, we can build relationships that we can use as fuel and energy to undertake the necessary daily actions to challenge systemic racism and hopefully bring about changes in public policy and institutions so that we, as a nation, we can finally create one that truly offers liberty and justice for all. In the spirit of examination, I believe that that if you want to change the world, you have to change yourself first. And I know that white people like me, for these conversations are vital as we recognize and meet our obligations to do the work to change ourselves. And that is the first step. In saying this, I reflect that it may involve many components, thoughts, words, and deeds, and that we will all need to reflect on and be accountable for, and that we will undoubtedly display imperfections at times because of our humanness to carry out this kind of work. So now let me introduce our two special guests, Samantha Isom and Leon Dash. And in doing so, express my profound gratitude to both of them for joining our conversation today. Samantha Isom is a photographer and filmmaker who spends a great deal of each year traveling to the world's great scuba diving locations, among other things. And through her online journal, brownpassport.com, she documents and reflects on her experiences traveling as a person of color. As she explains on her website, her goal with brownpassport.com is to inspire other minorities to realize their dreams and to see beyond barriers, and to help all who engage in a more truthful and open dialogue, and often about taboo subject matter that is too often swept under the rug and only spoken about in small circles. Professor Leon Dash is the first Swanlund Chair Professor in Journalism and African American Studies at the University of Illinois. He was a longtime writer and reporter at the Washington Post, where he earned the 1995 Pulitzer Prize in Explanatory Journalism for a series, Rosa Lee, A Mother and Her Family in Urban America, a body of work that also won the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Prize that year. This project has been cited as one of the 100 best pieces of 20th century American journalism by New York University's journalism department. He began his career at the Washington Post as an intern while attending Howard University, and in 1968 covered the aftermath of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., arriving in Memphis just a few hours after Dr. King's death. I want to welcome you both and thank you again for participating in today's conversation. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Tom. It's great
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Yeah.
So let's start the conversation, and I want to ask you both to reflect on where you are at this moment and where you think the country is, given the events of the last 2 weeks.
Well, I'll let Samantha go first.
Okay, Liz, I was going to say the same for you. This is a little bit of a story that I shared with some people over the years, but I'm not sure really, I'm still processing as to why I didn't really share it as much until recently. And that was, my uncle was actually left for dead by police officers years ago. He was in the 60s, but so I never actually got to meet him because they left him as a paraplegic. You know, he was a black teacher in Mississippi on his way back home to Alabama, and the witness said that the cops, he was outside of his car and then in the road, and they just ran him over and I mean, they floored the gas pedal and ran him over and left him that way. But so I've shared that story with some people, but then recently with this happening, it's been happening. That's why I even bring it up about my uncle. It's not something that's new, but with my uncle, it wasn't filmed. No one made any comments other than the witness came to my grandmother's house to tell her what happened. But you know, no one was reprimanded or anything like that. And there's countless stories like this. So the fact that it's still going on, of course, is beyond words. I can't really I'll get too emotional if I speak too much on it. But I will say that at least people are out taking to the streets again. And hopefully this time there will be more change that happens, and more, not just change in laws, but actually change in minds and society. I don't want to talk too long. I'd like Professor to say something, speak on that too. But that's where I'm at the moment, is processing, you know, the things that happen in our family, and then that it's still going on now. What can we do to actually initiate change besides just laws, you know? So.
Thank you, Sam.
Right. Much of what Samantha says, that this is still ongoing. I'm trying to keep up with it, and it's changing every day. There are a lot of elements to it. To me, one of my student of mine from 1998, Milton Carrero, this morning sent me a message asking, well, how did I see the ongoing protests? And I said, well, compared to 1968, a significant population of white America is out, a younger generation is out protesting with Black America about the abuse of Black people by the police all over the country. I'm reminded that when I was 14 in 1958, my father took me aside and sat me down for the talk. And he told me that I was taller than most of my friends who were the same age, and that if I got into trouble with the police, they would not treat me fairly. And at the time, I was so naive. I was growing up in New York City's Harlem. At the time, I was so naive that I didn't believe him. I thought that might have applied to his generation, but it wouldn't apply to mine. But really, what did I know? It wasn't too long after that, by the age 15 and 16, when we had moved up to the North Bronx, I began to experience what he was talking about, being stopped by police, questioned. And one of the things he told me stayed with me. It always comes back to me now, even as an adult. He said, if you are stopped, you are not to lose your temper, and you don't be rattled. Answer the questions as forthrightly as you can. And hopefully everything will smooth out and you will not have escalated what is essentially a confrontation. And so I followed that rule. I can still hear his voice playing in the back of my head. Tom and I were talking over the last couple of days about what changes ASMP can get into, or what programs ASMP can do to open up avenues for African Americans, young African Americans, to become photographers and videographers, I guess you would call them. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that we didn't really come to a hard and fast conclusion because it's a very complicated area, lowering barriers, both in terms of financing and the job opportunities that are available. But I'm hoping the audience will have some suggestions along those lines. Because I think we came to, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we came to a dead end as to seeking a viable solution.
I think you're right in saying that, Leon, and I think it exemplifies things that I've thought about really since the dawn of my career, about the need to enable access, not only in terms of the entry into editorial systems for mainstream media, but also really moving up, as you know, to move up in the ranks to really be in a position of power so you can change the dynamics of conversation about coverages and the way that communities are going to be regarded and the way that they're being represented and who is doing the representation. And I think that from where I sit, those are still very much top of mind conversations. And as you and I discussed, Leon, recognizing the challenge of amassing the kinds of resources that would enable robust internships and mentorship programs, I come back to that point in our conversation where I think it's incumbent on us now as the different groups representing different areas of creative endeavor that somehow we must come together as organizations to pool our resources to make some of that, really happen. And Samantha, I'm wondering from your perspective, as you got started, how do you relate to the conversation that we're having right now?
Well, there wasn't the level of internet that there is now, so it's easier now to find out that that's even a job or a path. But I would say outreach is I use the term clutch, like key, I guess, because where I was, it's, are you going to be, well, great, you're a newer generation. I mean, I'm not in my 20s now, but I'm saying years ago, even then, my parents, was more like, are you going to go to, you can go to college, you can go and become a lawyer, you can be a school teacher, you can be this. Nowhere was it like outside of it had to be something that was a definite job opportunity. They didn't see media as a job. They saw that as a luxury. Mm-hmm. So that was something, I was actually a musician and a photographer at the time, which was two forms of the arts. That was like a definite no-no there. So, I would say outreach is a big thing because in certain communities, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, But I think a lot of times what you happen is when you have certain groups that have maybe have a history of strife or strife in current times, then they just want to take the obvious path that might seem just really safe. You know, journalism or media or anything like that does not seem like an option, and they're not taught that generally. So if there were outreach somehow by our organizations to kind of let people know that they can become that is an option. You know, I thought it would be an option, but it took me like 10 years to figure out how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what an internship was, honest to God. Like I didn't know, unless you wanted to be a nurse. That's all I knew, or something like that. I didn't understand that this was an opportunity. I didn't grow up in New York City either. I grew up near Philadelphia, but in like a military town, you know. So it was just, oh yeah, join the army was another one. That's a big one, you know. Oh, you can get the GI Bill, go to college, you know, that kind of a thing. So I would say outreach is a big one. But also outside of that, when I did start to come in the ranks, at first I saw no one that looked like me. No one. No, not even any. Well, I saw one black male. I mean, I'm counting, you know, over the years. Like, and then later, as time progressed, I saw more and more. And then I started reading about Gordon Parks and about some other people. But the fact that you can still count people on one, even two hands, or you can name just about everybody is ridiculous. I was speaking on a panel once where someone had said, and God bless him, but I just don't think he got it. And he had said, well, you have to read your history, and you guys, you know, photographers of color, you have to know that you're not the only ones, and you have to know. And I said, you just named 6 people. The fact that you can name everybody and then you blank because you can't even think of a face that you recognize is the problem. People are not seeing that sometimes. They think, you know, you have one president or you have one photographer, or you have one success, that all of a sudden it's all good, but it's clearly not. And I'd hope that it doesn't take someone's murder for people to realize that.
Yes.
That makes sense, you know?
Yeah, it does. And, you know, Leon, I mean, this obviously begs the question of mentorship and conscious effort to inculcate that attitude into the culture of newsrooms. And I know in particular, and I'm just thinking about that, Samantha, in the context, because it's an environment that I spent most of my career in. And so that'll be my frame of reference to some degree for the conversation. But when I think about it, it just strikes me that that this was that the work has to be done on 2 levels, I guess, in terms of the culture of newsrooms, and that what I've witnessed, particularly, I think, in the last decade, certainly, and maybe the last 2 decades, is that some of the gains that were, and admittedly minimal in terms of the placements that you're describing, Samantha, that those have even been rolled back because of the as media entities fight for survival. It's all about the money, and everything else kind of falls away. And I'm just wondering, how do we bring that back, Leon? I mean, what's your thought on that, knowing the work that you did at the Post, particularly on this issue?
Right. I wanted to dovetail on what Samantha had to say. It was brought back memories. I started as a copy boy at the Washington Post November of '65 while I was going to Howard University during the day. I was a night copy boy. I worked what is called the lobster shift. I didn't know what the lobster shift was until I applied for the job. And someone explained it to me. But at any rate, that was in November '65. In April, the following April, the city editor, Stephen Isaacs, offered me an internship that would begin in June, a 2-year internship as a reporter, beginning reporter. So my becoming a reporter was really happenstance when you examine it. And I think more so that the Washington Post was afraid that they were going to have a riot in the summer of '66. So they needed more Black reporters because the Los Angeles Times wasn't able to send any Black reporters to the riot in Los Angeles in August of '65, and the Washington Post didn't want to be caught like that out front. So the circumstances outside the news industry was pushing the news industry to bring in black reporters, but specifically to cover riots, really. But at any rate, I went into the internship program that June, still going to Howard, and I usually worked at night, went to school during the day. And within a year, I was on staff. It was a 2-year internship, but I made it within a year because I pushed myself to produce my own stories and be a self-starter. Now, I was reminded of something else that came from my father when I told him at some point, 66, 67, I intended to pursue a career in journalism. And his reaction was, well, how are you going to eat? He didn't even know journalists were paid. He was concerned that I'd be moving back home and living off of him. No, I'm being facetious. But that was so much out of the realm of anything that he thought was available to me. He knew it hadn't been available to him. And so and Samantha's experience reminded me of that. How do we get beyond that in a period of tight budgets and the downturn that occurred with everyone moving to the internet with the advertising? I don't have an answer for you. I'm hoping that this dialogue will lead to an answer because realistically, there was kind of opportunities. I don't know that today the Washington Post has an internship program. It might. I haven't examined it or asked anyone about it. It hasn't come up in any conversations that I've had with former colleagues. So, but the Washington Post back then in the 60s was a newspaper that was wealthy. And that changed in 99, 2000, when the advertising moved online. I don't know that they can afford an internship today. I know the newsroom is substantially reduced from the point that I left in August of 98. What does that mean in terms of offering opportunities to Black Americans or minority Americans or people of color? I don't know. It's something worthwhile in terms of wrestling with, looking for solutions. Oh, and you mentioned mentorship. I was mentored briefly by a Washington correspondent who had grown up in the South. His name was Robert E. Lee Baker, the late Robert E. Lee Baker. You could tell he was from the South. His last name was Baker. His mother named him Robert E. Lee. And I used to tease him about that. But he mentored me for a short period in '67. It really helped me get on my feet and directed me into things to do. But that was the only mentor I had. Whereas I noticed around me, a lot of the white reporters were perpetually mentored, both by editors and older reporters. And in fact, in one conversation I think I shared with you, Tom, one of the people that I had come to know when I worked in the newsroom as a copyboy, because he was often there late at night, I watched him mentor a fellow reporter that lived that had a desk right across the aisle from mine. And finally, I stopped him one day and I said, I see you keep advising Bob, but you haven't offered me a bit of advice. Why is that? And he was very embarrassed, but it was very clear that he felt an personal affinity for my colleague and not for me in this context. And I saw a lot of that. I pushed forward anyway. But there wasn't any mentoring going on, informal mentoring going on of Black reporters in the years that I worked at the Washington Post. Yeah.
Samantha, did you have the similar experience getting started yourself?
I was just writing notes about it, so I would, because there's so much to actually talk about. But yeah, because earlier when I mentioned that no one had looked like me, I didn't mean like you need to look in the mirror when you're working with somebody, but an understanding sometimes of maybe a background, or sometimes people are having a conversation and it may be rather offensive, or they don't understand it, why, and you're the only person that represents a demographic that may be from a point of view they don't understand. Okay, so I'll back up a little bit. Mentorship wise, I really didn't have that happen until I moved to, I had one wedding photographer who mentored me, which was great. That was, it was just he and I, and he really, that was amazing. Commercially, I didn't have a mentor. I would say this one guy in Chicago, but not really until maybe I was in my late 30s, even in New York. I mean, because there was one guy when I lived in Miami in my early 30s, and he had said, he actually gave me some really great advice. He said, you know, people are going to see you in a certain way. And he was not a black guy. He was a white guy, white photographer, but he had lived in Atlanta. And he worked with me when he was traveling to Miami to shoot some fashion stuff and editorial and whatever. And he said, you know, people are going to look at you and they're automatically going to tell you that you should move to Atlanta. They're going to tell you to shoot hip hop. They're going to put you in this way and that way. And he said, I live in Atlanta. I can say that because, you know, I'm the one shooting hip hop there. They're looking for photographers that look like you. So I will say that you would probably do well there, but it doesn't, he knew that, you know, I didn't want to move somewhere or just to be pigeonholed or pick an area of the business to be a stereotype again. You know, only black photographers can shoot hip hop, you know, but he was really schooling me on a lot of that. So that was the first experience of a little bit, I would say, of a mentorship in a way, although we didn't live in the same city. So I didn't have the opportunity to have an ongoing mentorship. He's a really good friend of mine still to this day and helps me out too. He was a really huge advertising photographer at that point, even bigger afterwards. But I never forgot what he said. He said, you know, you might have a hard time when people look at you a certain way, a black female, or even sometimes they don't even know that. They're not sure what I am at first, you know, because I'm of mixed heritage. But he said, you're already going to have probably problems as a female, but as a person of color, they're not used to seeing you. And so that's what I would say by not just looking around and seeing anyone that looks like you, but experiencing it a little bit differently, because it's how people see you, not just how you see them. You know, you're going into a room and then you have any hip hop pictures when you show your portfolio? No. You know, you should try to hit up Essence magazine. Yeah, but you're Nat Geo. I'd like to shoot for you. I can only shoot for the black magazines now. You know, of course I shop for Essence, but does that mean I can only shoot for Essence? It kind of feels like they're saying that to you when they tell you should just go hit up Essence. You know what I mean? Or you should go to Atlanta, or you should go. I mean, that's not actually that long ago that I've heard that too. I've heard that over the years, but recently I've heard things like that. And then you just scratch your head like, is anybody else hearing this in the room? But not really, because if you're the only one in the room, you're the only one that maybe that's either noticing it, or maybe the only one that's showing that you notice it, which can be rather strange. I just feel like having more diversity there, especially more African Americans in there, especially with the history in this country, I just feel like maybe we won't have to hear that as much, or it can be discouraging too. And you need to be encouraged, not discouraged. And it takes 10 times the amount of strong will just to feel like you might be welcome in the room. You know, Chris Rock had said that once. He said, what do you got? You got to be, you know, really on top just to get a house in the same neighborhood that a white dentist has to get. Our industry, I feel like, is not too dissimilar. I feel like, you know, I have to have, you know, 3 times the degrees or 3 times the experience, or, you know, what level of work, how many awards do I have to show before you consider me? You know, I don't want to keep going on forever, but yeah, it's interesting. You know?
No, this is, I mean, it's heartbreaking to me to hear it, you know, first of all, but I recognize the truth of it as well. And I guess, where does that leave you? You know, where does that leave you? Where does that leave you going? Where does that leave you? You know, what is it that you know, would hope could be a step that we could all take collectively to address that, both of you?
I mean, well, quickly, in the last, honestly, since the Trump election, this might not be a popular statement, but I really think that things, as much as people say things have gotten worse, to me, they didn't get worse. They just were on the blanket. The rug was taken off of all the dirt that's been sitting there. So if anything, it's a little bit better, aside from, of course, what we're dealing with now and a lot of things that it's been ongoing negatively. But I mean, as far as I see more African Americans shooting, they came out of nowhere. Thank God I'm guessing seems like they're a lot younger than I. And it seems like maybe they didn't have to go through the things that I had to, or maybe that Leon had to go through to get where we are, you know, and I hope they didn't. And that's great that they could get there sooner. And there's more of us. But then also I look and it's almost like, oh, well, we got to hire Black photographers, so let's go get this person. I get that's great. That's a way of overcorrecting in a way, just to get somebody in there. But at the same time, don't let that be a fad. Don't let that be just a flash in the pan. Like it's hot because Trump was elected and you want to show that you don't have a race problem. So all of a sudden you hire a Black photographer and then 3 months later you forget about it, but that person's already in. So now they get work. Is that going to happen now too? So I feel like there can't be a fad. It can't be just that. It has to be, we have to understand the real reasons behind that. It can't just be just because you want to look good, because you want to say your set looks diverse and then you have an Instagram photo or video or whatever, because I've been on those sets too. Oh, our set's so diverse. You're Black, right, Sam? Cool. Okay, good. Yeah, our set's really, that happens. Our set's really diverse. I know you're laughing. That was only like a couple of years ago. I said, wow. Okay. I mean.
All right. Well, about where we are today. When I started in '66, there were a handful of Black reporters working for major publications and news outlets, both local broadcast outlets, radio and television, and newspapers around the country. And we spent several years trying to organize the National Association of Black Journalists and finally succeeded in December 1975. Today, that organization has better than 3,000 members, which, at one point when someone pointed that out to me several years, more than 20 years ago, I said, wow, yeah, it has really grown. And then attending the convention, you run into a lot of Black reporters and also Hispanic reporters and Asian American reporters. And that has given me a lot of optimism about where we stand today compared to when I started in '66. Because really putting together the National Association of Black Journalists, because we really strongly felt there was an organization that needed to enter its voice into this issue of hiring and promotion. I was one of 7 Black reporters that filed a discrimination complaint against the Washington Post with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, known as the Metro 7. And that was my drive to be a member of, or be a part of putting together the National Association of Black Journalists. So there is an advocacy organization that the NABJ is today. And from that grew the National Association of Asian American Journalists, National Association of Native American Journalists, and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and all of them advocating for inclusion and promotion and a voice in the American media. That's a very good development. The Trump administration has sort of energized me. I spent too much time reading everything I can get my hands on about the Trump administration. This is a very existential threat period that we're living through, I feel strongly. And the journalists, as well as the John Q. citizen with an iPhone, is sort of practicing civic journalism. The recording of the abuse to the point of murder of George Floyd was done by a citizen. I believe she's a woman, and she took the recording and was asking the questions, how long are you going to do that to him? While you can very clearly hear him on the videotape. So the world has significantly changed in that respect. That you have many million active civil journalists out on the street today. Just yesterday, I think it was in Buffalo, a video was captured of the police pushing down a 75-year-old man who is now in the hospital, in stable but critical condition. Banged his head and blood was coming out of his ear. And they moved on. They moved on. But it was captured significantly and put out there. And those 2 officers are now suspended. And this was involving 2 white police officers with a white man. So there was no ethnic component there. I don't believe so. One other thing I wanted to add that really significantly to me today is the multi-ethnic demonstration of the protesters, multi-ethnic composition of the demonstrators all across the country. And I think that's not an insignificant development. It's something really that we all need to focus on, and a lot more writing needs to go into an understanding and interviewing of the participants in the protest, I think. Yeah.
That raises a question for me for both of you in that regard, in terms of what you're seeing in the streets right now and how that energy is pushed forward in a way that doesn't let this be a singular moment, but that it's the energy that we can capitalize on collectively to really make change. And, you know, knowing of journalism's role in that, both print and written as well as visual journalism, how do you see our role in this? What can we be doing sort of collectively to express things that would keep that energy going?
Well, Sam, you want to start with that?
All right. Yeah. I mean, because I've done a bit of both on the journalism side, but also in the commercial side, a lot of the commercial stuff. And where I find through conversation, you can change a lot, right? But I mean, I'm gonna start over again. Look, if you're in the commercial side and you notice that there's somewhat of an injustice happening in the set, whether it's casting for a character, I mentioned this in an earlier conversation, where, you know, these are hard conversations to have, but you know, the client only sees the basketball players that they should be black. The client only sees the jazz musicians that they should only look this way, or they see the doctor as they can only be this role or that role. And I don't need to explain the demographic to you, because if I say, what does a surfer look like, or a doctor look like, or a basketball player look like, then there's things that pop in your head before you can have a chance to change that and decide what that is. And I think that's our job to fix. You know, people will blame it on the client decides who they want to choose, who they want to cast for these roles. But if we don't stand up and say something, that's never going to change. Or we're going to have to wait another 20, 30 years for that to shift. We actually do have a responsibility, I think, to say something. And I don't mean start a protest on the set, you know, or in a meeting when you're talking about casting a character. But I mean, maybe mention it. Are you sure you want it to be that? Or maybe we can like try to introduce something else. Like we can try and say, well, maybe, you know, this role can be this person, you know. If you're covering journalism, you know, maybe you don't, if I'm covering there's a news agency out in Europe that has asked me to film stuff for them, you know, and they usually want me to film more of the chaos aspect, you know. So say they would want me to shoot, oh, let me get somebody looting and let me get this. Well, why would I want to perpetuate that narrative when the majority of what's going on is peaceful protesters with a very mixed demographic, with like Leon was saying, which is what you want to show. You want to perpetuate that to show people, to encourage more change, not to have the same narrative of somebody blowing something up that probably doesn't even have to do with the protest in the first place. I don't know, you know. So I think that we I mean, as much as, you know, oh, well, that's what the boss wants me to do, or that's what I'm supposed to do. I get it. But at the end of the day, we kind of, even if we can stand up a little bit, or hopefully a lot more than that, that is how we can make change. Because it's because of us as to what people see or read. And what people see or read in the mainstream media is how they're going to think, is why they see what a doctor looks like, or why when they say, what does a surfer look like, they see this person. It's because of us. It's because of what we shot, or what we showed. So I think it's up to us to change.
I think that's incredibly insightful and on point for, you know, certainly some of the things that I've witnessed in my own career about the difficulty of sort of persuading, particularly editors who are above me, that their preconceptions of what reality is are not really what is being reported back by people who are out there. And Leon, I don't know, I'm sure you probably have had that experience.
Oh, there were a lot of conflicts about what I saw and what I was writing about and people that I was interviewing. There was a lot of conflict about, when I got back to the paper, dealing with editors on the city desk and national desk or wherever, about what they thought the story was and what I thought the story was. Thankfully, only once did I refuse to have my byline run on a story that the editor wanted written in a way that I disagreed with, and I told them to take my name off. And they later, with some intervention of editors above him, allowed me to write the story the way I saw the story, and then the story ran after a lot of back and forth. But there was always argument about what I saw and what the editor wanted me to write. And some editors would tell me what they thought the story was before I left to go out to cover the story. And that always startled me, you know. I don't know, as you mentioned earlier, Tom, that our role is to keep the protest level going. I think we are responsible for covering the protests and do it in depth. I think the media is doing right now a very credible job in reflecting the energy of the protests, its national nature. The estimates run from 200 to 250 cities across the U.S. And the multi-ethnic makeup is constantly in front of everyone and commented on. I'd like to think that that kind of energy that has exploded really this week can maintain itself and can organize itself into something concrete that it really begins to change the American society.
I guess I probably should have spoken to that more directly, because that's really what I was thinking, is more just the role of photographers, particularly in articulating underlying conditions and causes that are part of the conversation now as a result of what's happened. And I say that because a lot of there is a lot of discussion now about particularly moving away sort of from photojournalism as a vehicle, but you know, Samantha, for more of the commercial photographers, they're wondering what is their role in all of this and what is the contribution. And I think we actually have a question to that effect. You know, if you're a fine art photographer, say, or a travel photographer, how does that fit into the realities that are being expressed and could be expressed coming out of this moment?
I mean, as fine art or travel, it kind of goes in line with the brown passport that that I'm actually working on, because I mean, it is travel, you know, but I go around, and rather than eat at Joe's and stay at this place and that place, I mean, you can say some of that because, you know, if you're selling it, I guess, and that's what some people would want. But at the end of the day, get in there and change a narrative. Ask people what their thoughts are on things. You know, I ask people some hard questions. I interviewed this one guy he's from Java, which is it's the island where Jakarta is, right? But he moved to a more touristy area, and he said he never really saw black tourists, you know. And he said, so their perception of black folks was all they see. And this is what I mean by it's our role in the movies, the films, the books, and all that. And forget about whatever news they get, you know, that gets exported, the narrative that may be. And he said, you know, and he said the perception was criminal, basketball player, or, you know, they have a gang. He literally, this is what he was saying, you know, likes hip hop. And then he said, and then, you know, he's like, but then other narratives that they did get to see, like Barack Obama being president, or if they ever get to see any other narrative, it changes things, but also just by meeting people. He said, but before that, he said, if I didn't get to meet them, or I didn't see Barack as president, I mean, I don't really see anybody. So this is all I'm seeing. So I just feel like if you're a travel journalist or you know, travel photographer or travel writer, maybe do your best to try and cover things that people aren't asking you to cover, because oftentimes what they ask you to cover is the same narrative, right? Get in there and ask somebody, like the question like I asked this guy. Try and see if you can show that, because that really brings home the narrative that it's not in our heads, that people actually do, not everyone, but people do or can see you this way because of what's perpetuated in media, or one form of media, though a lot of it is commercial realm. It's still a form of media, and that also just shows where our role is in our responsibility, I feel like, and how we can change that narrative. It can't just always say, oh, the boss wants me to do that. Somebody has to stand up and say, but I want to do this at some point. Like Leon, if it means he didn't put his name on an article, then that's what it means.
Right. Right.
I mean, I don't know how else. We can't be scared. We have to say something or show something else, present it, push.
How hard is it for you both of you, to be out there knowing that you're a vehicle to both do representation of a particular community in a certain way, but also you're a representative in going into other communities in another way? And what kind of pressures do you both feel from that, and how does that manifest?
Well, I don't, I'm now in the university setting, so I'm no longer a working journalist, but I would be assigned to any number of different communities, both as a foreign correspondent covering the 1982, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, and other places. So I don't think, first of all, I started out as a generalist, not just covering Black people. I covered all stories, a lot of feature writing and a lot of daily stories at the beginning. And I was assigned to cover Montgomery County, right outside of Washington, D.C., which is a majority white county. And most of my stories were about the white politicians and white persons of Montgomery County. So going into other communities and functioning as a reporter is not, I don't think it's difficult, and that is where we wanted to get to.
Yeah, I cover kind of everything too, so I don't know that there's an other community for me that I would say. I don't think there is an other one. Recently I've been doing stories in changing the narrative, or with the Brown Passport, on I shot the Black Ski Summit out in Idaho, which ended up being the second largest COVID hotspot seemingly in March, 2 weeks after we left there. Not, of course, not because we're there, but, it was just a ski resort, and it just happened to be the timing, and a lot of flights in and out of Seattle, which is where that came from. But that being said, it was kind of, and also I shot the Black Scuba Diving Summit, National Association of Black Scuba Divers, which I'm a member, out in Egypt, out in November. And sometimes in certain tighter circles there, it feels like, it's interesting, the dialogue that happens. You're like, oh yeah, that's what this is like, where people will openly and freely talk about certain things like what we're discussing now, without an incident to ignite the dialogue. It's
Right,
just, you'll just
right.
talk about things. But and people just have a level of understanding that I forget about sometimes when I share some of the Brown Passport stories, or somebody goes, oh, again, it's in your head, or oh, they kind of make you second guess where you're even coming from, which stinks. Oh, you're digging for it, just because it's your American perspective. It's not really like that around the world. Meanwhile, I see advertisements for skin whitening creams on the airplanes in Southeast Asia. So I guess if we were to say an other group or other circles, that to me would be almost another circle, because it's, it's less generalized than everywhere else that I'm meeting or working for or doing. So when I'm in a more like in all Black community, like those two situations, I was like, oh, right. It made me stop second guessing what I was doing again, and realize, no, that where you're feeling in your gut that you have to share these stories, it actually is real. If you don't get that reinforcement once in a while, you can second guess, and you can almost even give up in a way. You can almost like, oh, well, maybe I'm being extra. It's too much. It's 2020. It's not 1975. But then look what happens here with George Floyd. So, we do have to reassure ourselves, or at least go somewhere to have a support network to help reassure you.
And I guess that gets us back in a certain sense to what we were talking about at the outset of the conversation, about really developing a much larger community that's more accessible and available for that kind of support.
Well, yeah, I had a book 10 years ago that I remember I presented it to a publisher, and it was about mixed race folks in America. I interviewed everybody with the same 10 questions, and then it's called So What Are You Anyway, right? So, but the pushback that I was getting was, oh, well, this is, it's 2010 or whatever year that was, and that's relevant now. There's plenty of iteration. Why is this a subject? Why is this relevant? And I don't know. Well, if you had a famous person in there, then I think I could sell it.
Yes, probably.
That's what I was like. Well,
like a serial axe murderer or something.
I'm saying, I was like, what are we doing here? So, it's just, it can be frustrating. So if you have more voices in the community that understand and are on the same page, you can get these stories shared without something this extreme with the helicopters going on right now, like I said, over my head, without that having to take place. It shouldn't take that for us to be able to share this dialogue, because this is the dialogue that ends up initiating change.
Right, right. One of the things that's come up as a question, and I know you've been out there, Samantha, obviously with what's going on and, so close to you, but a lot of discussion is occurring right now among photographers about who should be covering these protests and the aftermath. And, particularly if they don't work for a specific outlet at the moment and aren't really carrying an assignment. There's a lot of discussion about shooting images, particularly, which is interesting to me as a photojournalist, because I always saw it as our role to document history as it was unfolding as accurately and as precisely as possible, because that was how people would not only understand it in the moment, but future generations would understand what had transpired. But there's a lot of discussion now about shooting in ways that don't identify protesters, and also the idea that white photographers are not particularly well equipped to cover these protests for a variety of reasons, and specifically by Black voices in the protests. I'm wondering if you both could react to some of that discussion that's going on.
Well, I'm opposed to excluding people because of ethnicity on any grounds and covering any story. The protests that are going on or any other story. I really believe that a photojournalist should be able to access, whatever ethnicity, should be able to access the story and demonstrate or portray the story or display the story as accurately as possible if they're a qualified working journalistic photographer, for lack of a better term. So I don't think that white photographers should be excluded from covering the current protests. And I would never say that, of course, in the past they may have been, but more Black photographers that are available, the better. That's fine. But your ethnicity should not keep you from being able to do work, do your job. Yeah.
I agree 100% with what Leon is saying there. And the part about not being recognized, I find that strange, because really, I think that's new. I don't believe that's even a law. If you're out in a public forum like that, and it is journalism, you are allowed to shoot that. I mean, unless the law changed recently and I wasn't aware of that. I mean, I don't even know where that idea comes from, with the exception of some people. Maybe there's so much being shot and filmed now compared to like in the 90s or when I started out, where it was all film and there's 3 of us or 1 out there. There's 300 now. Everybody has a phone besides. That I don't really understand that part about trying to get people where they're unrecognizable. I mean, the whole point partially to protesting too is to be seen and be heard. So for someone to hide their face, I'm not sure I understand even what's going on behind that, with the exception of if they're doing something like looting, which in that case, I would want to see their face. You can't because they're covered, but I would want to see that because you want to see that that's not the person that's actually protesting, that's somebody doing something else. But covering a protest, I think that all voices should be heard and seen for that. Yes, it would be great for more Black voices to be heard now in general. But as far as photographing it, I still feel like the more coverage, the better. And hopefully it's in a more positive light. I don't think it matters what that person's particular demographic is.
I'd like to add that also there are a number of academic disciplines that require the people you interview or the people you talk about, even the people you photograph, remain anonymous. But I'm totally opposed to that for journalism. Journalism should display, if you get the person's name, add it to the story. The person's willing to give you his or her name. And I don't think there should be any smudging or camouflaging who you photograph. You begin to Photoshop the photo or the videos. I'm totally opposed to that, altering anything about the image. The image should be real. It should be,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it is based on your credibility as an individual photojournalist.
Mm-hmm.
Like the story you write is based, your byline comes with some credibility over time. And those things are destroyed if you begin fudging the image of the person or doing a Photoshop collage of the demonstrations. It should be a realistic. It should follow the standard dictates and processes that are used for journalism. Period.
One of the things that listening to you both on this that strikes me is the challenge of the moment of intentionality as part of the calculus of how work is being done, both in terms of covering the demonstrations, but really in a larger sense. And the difference, what are the differences and how do those manifest in terms of people with the reality that everybody with a smartphone is potentially a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And, that as a result, the world is so awash in imagery that it's hard to discern what's valuable, let's say, in a conversation like we're having or in the moment that we're in right now. So I'm wondering if you could both react to that a little bit.
I mean, as far as like narrative, I think like what Leon was saying about, I forgot the way he worded it, but, and your standards, the way you ask questions or the way that you credit someone that you interviewed and things. I think that that's important. As a longtime photographer and now videographer, filmmaker also, I have a hard time with the cell phone thing, but at the end of the day, that's actually kind of, it might be easier for you or better, you get better footage because somebody sees me coming in there with my gimbal or my big cameras and my big lenses, and sometimes you get a different reaction. It's interesting. Not all the time, but sometimes. I do have shameless plug for ASMP, the ASMP media badge, which works a lot of times, believe it or not, so it's helped. So that when if I had pulled that out a couple times in certain situations, and that's been of use. But if you have a phone, sometimes people don't even notice it, and you might even get something where someone's not trying to perform for you in front of the camera or be somebody else, because everybody kind of wants to get their 15 minutes of fame. If you just get them with a phone, they're being truly who they are sometimes. So there's that too. I just think that if you are showing and if you're shooting with that, whatever means you're using, whether it's real cameras or phones, I think even if you're not a writer, I do think get involved in somehow sharing a narrative, and that's not necessarily your opinions, but just at least state the facts, put it in some kind of context of what was going on, and maybe legitimize that a little bit more rather than just a hot 2-second clip for an Instagram story. I don't know if I appreciate those too much without some sense of context and more depth, because I think it's a responsibility of the person to share that.
And I think that's the challenge that I see in the moment right now. And what I was trying to allude to earlier is the notion that there are stories that must be told for the current realities to be completely understood. And while I'm sure that there are many, many photographers who are motivated to try to do that work, they obviously will need facilitation and encouragement to do it as part of it. But it's also sort of like, how do you advise people to sort of, and Leon, this is also for you from your background as a journalist, how do you advise people to really look inside themselves and see where their talents can be applied relative to the stories that need to be told?
I don't know if I have an answer for you there. I don't try with my students. I pick up early the students that I can see have a future in journalism. And I tell them that directly. I don't tell many students that. But I don't feel that I can look inside someone and tell them how to pursue the career. I tell them what is required in pursuing their career as a journalist, whatever type of journalism, because I teach broadcasts, videographers, and print journalists, students. I can tell them what will be required professionally in their lives and what I hope they can be. I always push them to be self-starters. Go after your own stories. Don't sit around in the newsroom waiting for an editor to assign you to a story. Look for the stories that interest you and go after them. If you have to do it particularly at the beginning of your career, if you have to do it on your day off or your days off, that's fine. That's not a problem. It shouldn't be a problem for you. You're young enough to both burn the candle at both ends and get your own individual stories. You've got a vehicle now to tell the stories if you're employed at an outlet and or a newspaper or broadcast or even a radio outlet. You have a vehicle now to present stories in your own voice. They have to be done professionally, but you can look at the stories that you think maybe are neglected and go after those stories. Any number of things you can do. One thing, you should always be insatiably curious about the world around you, because there are a million stories facing you every day. You have to develop the talent to pick them out and then go after them.
Do you find that you have to give students advice on cultivating that kind of curiosity? And is that even possible?
Well, what I tell students is that I find that journalists who have the most success in their careers are those journalists who are self-starters and those journalists who are insatiably curious about everything around them.
How about you, Samantha?
I mean, I'm not sure how to. So I do mostly my own stories and then pitch them and try to sell them. So although I did you run into problems, you can, hopefully not, I don't, moving forward, but you can run into problems. Oh, well, we don't really want to talk about that subject, or, oh, we don't, kind of like with the book that I had 10 years ago. I had done a story, this is an ongoing narrative about, Black scuba divers or Black surfers or Black skiers, like changing the narrative of how people perceive those roles. And I did one in Indonesia, and I included also Indians in that too, like people from India, because there's a little bit of a bias in the scuba industry towards certain groups, like, oh, they're not going to be good at it. So I did a story on that, and I pitched it to, well, I won't say their names, but it's a travel company. I do a lot of travel journalism, yeah. So they liked the first one that I pitched, was on the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which went really well. They went for that. They actually, it helped them win an award. And yet when I pitched them the narrative about, discrimination in the scuba industry, they only wanted to see my underwater photography and video, and they wanted me to change everything. So what I would say to a lot of other people doing it, I mean, yeah, you're going to get a lot of the stories you're going to be given aren't the stories you really want to tell. Push the ones you want to tell also. And if you can shoot both or tell both while you're there, do it. And even if it means you can't sell it to them, sell it to somebody else or put it on your own outlet. There's no reason not to now with all the outlets there are. We have more outlets now than ever, like whether it's Medium, way of writing that, or Reddit, there, I mean, I'm talking about things that don't pay the bills there, but so what? They might lead to something that does too. Pitch. Try to sell it to the Times. If they say no, go to the next outlet. But do your own stories too. And you can, like I said, a lot of times do them simultaneously to what you're being told to shoot or write about.
Okay. I'm getting a lot of questions, as you might expect, in the Q&A box. So I think I want to also, give everybody time to, give you both time to address those questions. One of the first ones, Leon, was referencing the National Association of Black Journalists. This person was asking for the student chapters now, what should they be doing in the moment? Let me make sure I have that right. Do you have advice for them in terms of their own positioning relative to what's going on?
Right. There's a lot of energy in the society now, and they should be looking for at least holding journalistic conferences about it. I know the student chapter here at the University of Illinois has done that. There's a lot of energy around the Trump campaign and the Trump administration and the upcoming campaign, election campaigns, and the actual outcome of the vote in November. These protests are part of now the American society, and there are any number of things to cover or write about and discuss. I would be holding conferences and inviting outside speakers to come to talk about different aspects of the energy in the society now. Not also, I wouldn't exclude COVID-19 and the coronavirus pandemic. Those are affecting the Black community in a large part, larger than the white community, because of historical issues of inequality and access to healthcare. So there are many, many things that we can be talking about, and as a student chapter, you can be talking about and preparing yourself to go out into the world and pursue a career in journalism.
Okay. And this one is for both of you. Besides documenting protests, what can professional photographers do to contribute to real and effective change in social justice, particularly?
I mean, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I want you to go first.
No, because I feel like I mentioned that earlier, as far as do projects that tell stories that we need to hear, not just that people might expect to hear, but that they actually should be hearing, from perspectives that often get underrepresented. Or if you're in the commercial side, stand up and say something when you see something to be strange. And I don't mean you have to be rude about it, but maybe make suggestions that maybe we want to shift the way this narrative is for this campaign, or if you have the opportunity to do so, or at least just comment on it. I know that's putting your neck out on the line, but somebody has to, so that do it in your art. This is an art, whether you're writing, shooting video, shooting pictures, don't forget about that. Art is supposed to do that after all, I think. Show that in your pictures. It doesn't just have to be covering a protest. Everybody's doing that now anyway. Do it on the daily in your own regular work. Tell a story. If you don't have the story from your personal perspective, ask questions for people that do, photograph those folks.
Yeah.
Oh, that was excellent. I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
It's just work professionally. Yes.
Another question, how should we be responding to photograph? And this, I think, Samantha, I suspect this is something you've experienced perhaps. How should we be responding to requests to photograph diversity in client events where the population is predominantly white, and the challenge of being sort of accurate in the representation given what the client really wants?
At events or in the casting?
I think it's saying in the client events, but it could be both, I suppose. You could answer it from both perspectives if you'd like.
I've had stuff where, you go shoot this party or go shoot that and try to show diverse crowd. That part I actually understand, where if it's a commercial part, like say a corporate event or something, they want to show more of a diversity, like their company is more diverse than it is. But I think they're trying to do that. That's a good intention to try and encourage more of that within the company. So I wouldn't really have a problem with that. If there's somebody that's in the commercial world asking you as an overcorrect to cast certain demographics, it feels weird. But at the same time, if we don't do that, then we end up getting the same narrative. We have still women doing laundry and all the Tide commercials, or we have, still Black kids playing basketball and that, so at some point you have to be conscious of it, I guess, and especially in those settings. But I'm not sure if I'm answering the question 100%, if I understand it. So I don't know how else to comment on that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Another question that's come in is, what questions should the white community be asking communities of color right now? And I mean, that's an incredibly broad, and I don't have any context for narrowing it as the question, but I think what's implicit is perhaps a recognition that something should be done and some questions should be asked, and I think they're looking for guidance or your reaction to that.
Well, they should be asked in their own communities. They should be asking people they face extraordinary scrutiny by policemen, and what are the barriers to access to decent housing, decent education, public education, a decent access to health care, those kind of questions, and ask the people, what are the barriers? The barriers are mainly economic, and the I think a lot of it begins with poor education that's available to African Americans in numerous public school systems around the country. And that's the beginning of the exclusion and inequality throughout the society. I don't have a specific set of questions that a person would ask, a white community would ask, someone in the white community would ask um, of people in the black community. But I don't think you have to go far to ask questions about what are the barriers you face to any, generally to any black person, and not get a response. You will get a response. Might not be a response you like, but you get a response. Yeah.
I love what you said. It might not be the response you like. This actually is huge, because when you do share something and you get the opportunity to share, whether they ask a question or just you're talking about the subject matter, please do not discount the experience. I know that people will sit up there and say, well, my mom didn't go to or I didn't have, if it's a white friend or something, I didn't have a lot of money to go to really fancy school, and I went to a broke school too. I get that. But now you're taking away from the experience and the whole, if you want to know what people are going through, accept what they're saying. Okay, accept the experience. Like Leon was saying, it might not be what you want to hear, and you might be a little uncomfortable hearing it, and all of a sudden have a rebuttal of, well, I was broke too, or we had it hard too, or our family were immigrants and this and that. It's not the same. Okay, it's not. Accept that. Just accept that, I would say. So more than asking questions, just actually listen without rebuttals and without, real question. Because a lot of us are saying this similar things in the black community, and then we'll sit up there and say something the opposite. Oh, well, it's not that hard for you now because, of course you can go to college now, or you can and they're not thinking about all the history and all the things that it took to get to this point, to get us where we are now. They're not thinking about all that. First of all, they should do some reading and relearn what maybe they were taught from school, because we didn't learn all these things, right? This is new. Maybe the kids now are learning it, but people that are adults didn't learn it for sure. So start there, and then just listen. Even if your black friends are saying something on the subject matter, just listen. Try not to argue.
Thank you so much for what you're just saying.
I like to add.
I am so grateful for that.
I'd like to add an anecdote of that situation. I was invited by a group of journalists, Society of Professional Journalists in Indiana, some years ago, to give a talk about the exclusion that's represented in a story I did on that you mentioned earlier, Rosalie, the family of Rosalie Cunningham. And I was talking about how poor the family was and how they had come out of North Carolina without ever being given a basic academic education, and had worked as sharecroppers, sharecropping being another form of slavery. And then came to Washington, and then their problems compounded because they had rural farming skills, but no skills on how to survive in the city. And a lot of drugs entered the family, and then that petty criminal enterprise entered the family, and criminal recidivism. And after the talk, well, one of the people who was in this Indiana branch of the Society of Professional Journalists came to me and she said, well, why? My grandparents were Italian immigrants, and they couldn't read or write, and they got jobs as tailors. And why was Rosalie's family any different? And I looked at her and I said, do you really believe in your grandmother's generation, your grandparents' generation, that the people who hired them to work as tailors would have hired black people coming out of rural North Carolina? Do you really think they would have given them the job? And then she sort of, a light went off. Said, yeah, what your grandparents experience and what a Black family of the same generation experience is very, very different. Go ahead. I just wanted to add that. Yeah.
No, that's it. I mean, acknowledgement is the key to healing is one thing that I just wanted to say. That's almost like a form of a reparation, if I may be so bold as saying that. Because if you don't, the lack of acknowledgement and the continued lack of acknowledgement is part of the problem. You know, part of the big problem. The more you just feel thrown in the trash, like all your experience is it means nothing, you know. But the more that people actually acknowledge it, the more that you are actually able to heal, the generations are being able to heal, and then everybody else is able to heal also. But if you just discount it like, oh, no, well, that was a long time. But even when I tell people about my uncle, you know, the minute they hear me say that it was Mississippi, oh, well, okay, that's Mississippi. They want to compartmentalize it like it's something else. It means something else. It doesn't mean something else. Or because it happened in the 60s, well, that wouldn't happen now. But it does happen now. Or even if it didn't, it still affects who we are now because they haven't even really been able to share the experience in the way that needs to be shared because of lack of acknowledgement. That's
right. Your uncle in Mississippi was left paraplegic.
And
he
passed after that. Yeah.
George Floyd in Minneapolis was killed.
Yep. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
I mean,
just this week. Yeah, last week.
Yeah.
Tom?
I am listening. I'm listening. and I, you know, and in the moment, my eyes are a little bit watery, and I just want to thank you for what you both have just said. Getting back to the questions, thinking about media today, this question is really about what the presence of the internet as a defining factor in media, and how do you think that is influencing mainstream media's evolution, and are the two kind of growing up side by side in a way where over time roles will reverse? Because I mean, I remember back in '98, Leon, as I was coming and you were going from the Post, there was a lot of discussion on our side of the river about the idea that if we looked outside of our organization, we were seeing sort of individual exercises of media communication on the internet that were clearly not as mediated with gatekeepers as a media company like ours would have had. And so I'm just wondering about what your view of the effects of that are, and is that of the two kind of now existing side by side, and that photographers could reach an audience with their work without the necessity of intervention by a mainstream media company in quite the same way. And I guess I'm asking both of you to respond to that and just give me your thoughts on, does it still matter, the questions that we're asking about reforming mainstream media, does that still matter? Is it still a really important question for us all to be grappling with right now?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Reforming mainstream media?
Yeah, I mean, changing the mainstream media so that there's more opportunity and more access for photographers of color.
Oh, okay.
And then, you know, contrasting that with their opportunity to find audiences for their work on social media, but it doesn't necessarily equate to them being able to make a living that easily. Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of wanting to get your thoughts on that.
I think Samantha is in the best position to answer that than I am.
Well, I mean, I think if the people hiring you or deciding the stories that get published, that would be maybe if there were more African Americans there or people of color in general in those roles, then when you're presenting stories with this narrative, maybe they're more likely to get published. I don't know, because sometimes I just feel like, you know, like I said, I show it. Oh, well, we don't really, we just give us your scuba pictures. We just don't write all that stuff about, you know, the race and the whole thing. Just write this story. But they're not Black either. I don't know. Maybe, and I shouldn't assume that just because they would be, that they would want the story. But I mean, maybe there would be more of a chance in there if there's more diversity in the hiring, in the decision makers. Then more of our stories can actually be told without getting discouraged. Because it is discouraging. I mean, it gets discouraging. You just kind of go, "Oh, all right, then." Oh, and then you start thinking like that, like, oh, well, I can't present this story. Nobody's going to go for that. Well, you know, that's not what we should be doing.
Right.
You know?
So what's your process for seeking out opportunities? I mean, not just as a photographer right now in terms of doing pitching and, you know, kind of how you'd go about that.
I mean, for stories like that, the brown passport thing has been huge. I just did it on my own, and working in the commercial side, whether shooting or as digital tech or lighting tech or whatever, has paid for it up until a point. And then I, through some lucky breaks and who I know, which seems to be the way of everything kind of, I was able to get the story pitched for, of course, it was for Black History Month, as if these stories are only good for Black History Month. But thank God they published it, you know, and I got paid for it. And that was I pitched to them the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and did a really in-depth story, twofold though. One for Brown Passport, which was a deeper narrative than the one that they ran with. Ironically, it's the same folks though that didn't want the Black perspective on scuba and just wanted the scuba pictures, maybe because it wasn't Black History Month. I don't know, but you know, just keep pitching. I pitched something to an entity I don't want to say right now because the jury is still out. They said they want to publish something, but they were scrutinizing the writing, and so that was discouraging. And I just said, hey, you know, and you look at this other writing and you're like, that's not really actually any better. In fact, it's very similar. I don't understand.
Right.
But they may publish this. If she's listening, she's going to know what I'm talking about. This is okay. I'm looking at you. Remember, you said you might publish something. So I'm still pushing and pushing for this narrative, but then in the meantime, you just get it out on your own. And then being in the commercial world, do what you can there, you know, whether it's something fancy, like with a big name, like Ferrari or somebody like that, or if it's just a no name, like a small liquor company or a small business, whatever, you're still getting paid, you're still shooting. Do that and let that help, you know, fund your life to continue to push the other stories in the direction that they need to go.
This one is interesting to me. Well, they're all interesting, but this question is I'm going to read it because I'll try to make it clear. I've yet to see statements or comments from organizations with substantial reach make any definitive declaration or take a stance on the current social climate of our country. And I know that, you know, that's speaking of politics as well. After speaking with my leadership, I was told that it is not the job or place of journalism to be advocates, only to tell stories. Is there room for an exception? What are your thoughts on media persons, newsrooms, board members, employees, etc., making statements such as Black Lives Matter or agreeing with calls for social justice to remedy injustice?
Well, that happens all the time. I don't know what the person is reading. That happens all the time. At least I'm reading it on editorial pages and in op-ed political columns or op-ed columns, per se. It doesn't necessarily have to be political. People have a wide range of, just not the reporters. The reporters are on one side of the newspaper covering the news. And ideally, they're not supposed to express a lot of ideas publicly or their positions publicly or in their news columns. But the editorial writers, the editorial board of any publication is free to express any number of opinions, and they do. Mm-hmm. And columnists across the country. You know, one of the benefits of the internet is the amount of information that's available on the internet. You and I talked about an article yesterday that I wanted to read, and I had heard about it on NPR yesterday, and then I looked it up this morning and read it. Right?
Right.
Just by going on the internet, all I had to do is enter the author's name and the publication, and boom, there was the article, and I read the entire thing. It was well written and very well informed. So that's a benefit of the internet. And I don't know where the writer of the question, where he or she may get their information, but there's a lot of editorial positions out there from any number of publications, and they cover the whole spectrum of political point of view: left, center, right, and even today alt-right.
So I have a question that sort of is mapping into politics and the work that you both have done, and Samantha, in your case, are doing. I saw a survey result this morning that said 75% of Americans believe that the George Floyd killing was indicative of much larger problems in our society. And I'm thinking back, and I mean, Leon, from the perspective of 1968, but I'm also looking at the what I would characterize and what we talk about as the dystopian vision of America that's being promulgated by various political leaders right now, starting with the president. And I'm wondering, given the gap of contradiction that exists between the two, and what is your sense of the moment right now? And do you both believe that the survey results now are going to stick and allow us to overcome the hate rhetoric and the divisiveness that's being pushed?
Well, it's being pushed by certain people. But I read the same article, and it said in '68, I think there was 35%, or an earlier period, there was only 35% of the white population that believed blacks are targeted by urban police forces. Is that correct? It was down to 35%. Now it's up to 75%.
Right.
A lot of that is because of the internet. There's a lot of that because of the civil journalism that's practiced by citizens. They may not call it that, who are videotaping these instances of abuse and posting them online. There's so many, I don't watch them all. You have to be selective so I can get on with the day. But I think that's a great development. And I think it's a sea change. What it has produced is a sea change in the American population toward what the police have been doing for many, many years, at least in urban centers. I don't know how far back, but well beyond even my father's generation. And that was my father was warning me about in 1958. I came to believe it some time ago from personal experience, but it's now captured for the world to see. And I think that's made a big difference. You look at the protests that took place in New Zealand, in London, Amsterdam, and people were shouting Black Lives Matter as part of the protests. That's a significant development, and it really all comes out of the internet. The world's understanding of what's going on domestically in the United States.
How do you think we reach the hearts and minds of white people who simply don't understand this reality at all,
Well,
notwithstanding what we've all seen?
My own conclusion is there's one thing about people who don't understand it, and I'm willing to sit down and engage them. People who ignore it or say that it's all fake news, and I've encountered those people too. I don't try to engage, to be frank. I've tried to in the past, but their mindset is set so that they don't believe it at all. Now I'm working on a book project myself, and one of the people that I have interviewed, is a descendant of a well-known Virginia Tidewater plantation owning family, slave owning family. And she said until she saw the videos on the internet, This is a woman who is in her 70s, and she's very, very up with the current technology. Until she saw all the videos on the internet about the way policemen treated Black people, she had no grounds to believe what Black people had been telling her in terms of the way they're targeted by police forces. So that really changed her own mindset. And she was not either in a sort of a cultural cul-de-sac where I'm only going to believe this. So it has had the internet, coming back to one of your earlier questions, the internet has had a significant impact on that 75% of the people who now understand how Blacks are targeted by police forces.
Part of it is peers, I was going to say too, because as that's being more visible, then you have maybe more of their peers, or even whether I use the term peers kind of loosely, more people collectively believing this, and in turn, they now see themselves as more of a minority for not seeing it or not believing it or can't. So then it's like, oh, well, maybe, and if they're paying attention to that, then they may question what they've been believing the whole time. But if you have it where the majority of the belief is that same narrative, they have no reason to question it. They should have reason to question it, but I'm saying for some people they don't. Well, this is always the way it's been. It's just the way things are. Oh, no, that's just that fake news, that thing. But kind of like maybe even wearing a mask, right? You have no friends that are wearing them. Well, why should I wear one? But then if you're the only person who's not, at some point, you start looking around, and you, even if you don't think there's anything wrong with you, at least you're made to second guess it. So in this situation, maybe that's more of a herd. It can be a herd mentality, or that can have a great effect, which once again, the internet has had an effect on. But education, I think, is really it. Again, education is everything, right? But if they're not willing to learn, I don't know what to say. People want to ask questions, do some reading, but do some real reading, like real research, and real watch programs, do real, not just like the same narrative, it's not popular. Columbus came to discover America. No, like really read what actually happened, Don't just take for granted what you were told, but do some real reading and start to question that maybe what we were taught was incorrect.
And this is kind of in the context of the questions about narrative. Do you think photography, and by extension other forms of journalistic media, set the narrative, or does photography follow the narrative?
Both.
Can you elaborate?
I mean, it depends on that is context. You can set, and timing. Say you're the first person to have gotten the George Floyd situation out there, then that set the stage. But say now everybody's shooting the stuff afterwards, then now, even though it's for the same reasons as they're shooting it, somebody could arguably say that's part of the trend, or part of the following the thing, when that's not really what it was intended to do, hopefully. But it can be seen either way.
And this one, I misunderstood the question earlier about when I was asking about journalists and people in editorial systems responding to Black Lives Matter and acting, expressing it in a way. And what the person was really referring to, in terms of expressing advocacy, was whether there's a role for organizations like ours, or National Association of Black Journalists, or other organizations. Obviously, it wouldn't be as, I'm sure that the National Association of Black Journalists has opined on the realities of the moment already, and articulated, Black Lives Matter.
They have.
As a support and an expression, of support. But for other organizations, I think what the person was getting at is that the culture of journalism to be quote unquote objective somehow implies a neutrality that must be overcome in this particular moment
But
with this particular.
neutrality only applies to reporters. Doesn't apply to people who are hired to express opinion.
Right, but I'm also talking about organizations like ours taking a stand in support of the movement and really being forthright in expressing that support. And I've got several questions that are really challenging questions for us to answer as an organization, and I will at least attempt to articulate them and respond to them in a moment. But I think that the implication is, shouldn't organizations like ours, ASMP, be doing that articulation right now?
I don't know. I think that's something ASMP has to make up its mind about whether it wants to do that or not. I don't have any strong opinion about what the National Association of Media Photographers should not be doing in terms of taking a public posture. A public posture supporting Black Lives Matter or the protests may compromise you in the future in terms of your credibility. But that's something you as an organization have to look at yourself and see if there's any danger going down that road. What we discussed in terms of increasing the number of Black photographers is maybe opening up internships if you ever are able to put together the financing to do that and provide through your own contacts avenues for young Black reporters who are beginning, men and women, provide them with some avenue into the industry, into the media industry.
Outreach, because we use the term internships a lot, but internships in these days is a bit of a luxury because they don't pay for internships now, right? Yeah. So that's the thing. When I mentioned I didn't know what an internship was, I did find out short to follow, but I didn't know how I was going to pay for it because I had called Rolling Stone at one point. I was like, I really want to shoot for you. Oh, well, you could just do intern. And that's kind of how I found out what that meant. But I was living in a town that it was close, but yet too far away to come on the daily, especially with the hours that they probably would have required. But then how am I going to live in New York? I didn't have but $5. I didn't see it as an opportunity that was something that I could do. So with outreach is king. And like Leon was saying, with maybe an organization that can do some kind of mentorship or internship in a way, outreach is a big one because some people will see that as a barrier. Oh, I can't afford an internship. I can't this, I can't that. Because remember, they may not be coming from a background that's all that supportive with that too. You know, I mean, you mentioned, I believe you went to Howard, I think. I noticed that HBCUs, a lot of the folks that I met through the National Association of Black Scuba Divers and through the National Brotherhood of Skiers, the Black Ski Group and the Black Scuba Group, is either military or HBCU. Very high on the list. And why I say that is because the level of confidence that they teach you in these universities is more than I've seen anywhere else, except for maybe somebody's fortunate enough to have parents to have done that, which many of us did not. It just was different, you know. And so you might be coming from a background that you don't really see anything but barriers. But when you have an organization that can go in and understand that people might only be seeing barriers, to overcome that and say, hey, no, we can help you figure out how to do it, help come up with solutions to get people to do it, because they may just say no because they think they can't, not because they don't want to. So don't give up on those kids.
And I think that is really addressing a central question that was raised a minute ago regarding our own efforts and what are we doing to respond to the moment as an organization. And what I am realizing, listening to you both today and feeling very forcefully in response, is the realization that we must, I think, go forward with the notion of trying to work with other groups to figure out a funding solution that makes the kind of internship and mentoring possibilities that we've been talking about much more part of our activity. And I think that while we have always said that we act as advocates for photographers' rights in a variety of ways, including legislation on Capitol Hill, and that we provide legal support and we provide business advice. What I am realizing, feeling, listening to you both, is that we really need to be taking this on as well. And I think clearly what I'm hearing suggests to me that as an organization, our first move is to start talking with other organizations about how we marshal resources.
Exactly. Marshaling resources is going to be your biggest hurdle, I think. I think the will is there on
Right.
the part of a lot of people. But what Sam was pointing out is that she couldn't take internships, let's say, in a place like New York City, where just renting a closet to live in for a couple of months is $10,000 a month. To live in Manhattan, you either have to be very poor, or very rich, or very well off. And I've had a number of my students, students of color, who didn't have the income to take an internship that they had won, because the internship offered either no support or some small amount of support, but they still couldn't move to the city where the internship was offered because they couldn't find a place to rent. Some of them were lucky that people took them in. People in the organization said, all right, well, you can come and stay with me for the summer. But that's, you're relying on the goodwill of strangers to take you in. The big thing was eating and a space to live in.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. Because I didn't have bills at 17, but I didn't understand how I was going to pay rent or eat. And I said, well, I can't, my little jalopy car wasn't going to make it with all those trips all the time. At the distance, you can't sometimes. It's prohibitive.
You notice, Tom, earlier I said that I was working at the Post full time and going to school full time.
Right, right.
Yeah, when I tell my students that, they say, oh, Lord, it's terrible. I said, no, that was all right. I was young enough to be able to do that. That's why I don't accept your excuses about you're tired and sleepy. At 21, there's no such thing.
But at some point too, health reasons, we shouldn't have to I had 3 jobs in college, at some point you shouldn't have to. Now kids are taking, not even kids, but adults get Adderall or something. It's like a wake me up pill. It's destructive. Right. You shouldn't have to rely on that to do your job or to go to school or something and then actually when you do, then the kids that don't have 3 jobs are taking the same pill anyway. And now they're just studying twice as much. So so the expectations are even higher. I've seen that happen, which is not good either.
Right.
So that's something to be said for that. How we level a playing field for people to have these opportunities, even if you're given the internship, how do you do it?
And this is another question that, this is coming to me, so I'm just going to try to answer it and then get back. But one of the questions that they had asked is about the history of ASMP with regard to addressing what we've just been talking about. And when I did some work in our archives this summer and was very pleased and interested to see that back in the early 60s, there was an effort made to assist photographers of color and others, and certainly white photographers as well, who were covering the civil rights movement in the South. And that part of the conversation had grown out of the fact that African American photographers in the South needed cameras to really document in their communities, and obviously film and chemicals and all the resources of the film era. And efforts were made, particularly in New York, to marshal those resources and then deliver them. And I think it's clear that sort of things circle around and hit at various spots. And I think that this is raising for me again the idea that we have to have these internal discussions to figure out what we can do next to be of support and help. And then I think this really nets us to one final question. Well, and a person was asking about ASMP's commitment to diversity. So let me tackle that with you both first in terms of recruitment, not only of membership, but also participation in the various chapters around the country, and in a sense, it feels to me, and I'm very acutely aware of the lack of diversity right now, that we need to acknowledge it and then just ask for advice from people like yourself about how to go about uh, thinking about things to begin to remedy the problem. And I just kind of wanted to I hope I'm not putting a burden on you that's untoward, but I just wanted to get your response to it a little bit and some thoughts that can help our board.
Right. I think that if your board would be willing to set up internships, that's a big leap forward. But again, the board is going to have to come up with resources. And I don't know, maybe you can tell us what resources you have in mind to go to support such a program, because you have to support people while they're actively involved in your internship program. And how long do you want the internship to be? I told you the internship that I went into in '66 was a 2-year internship.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to do the 2 years, but I could have done the 2 years if I wasn't so driven myself, internally driven to do a lot of work. So how do you support the young people that you want to recruit or bring into these programs and put them in strategic places, just not in one location, let's say outside of DC, but all over the country? It's an expensive proposition, and that's the biggest barrier to organizing something like this.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, you know, from my position here and what I've seen over the last few years in this role. Samantha, I thought you were going to talk as well.
Yeah, I mean, and if not all parents think this, but if they come from a background where their parents are saying, similar to what Leon and mine would say, like, that's not a job, you know, you want to have a safety net, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how, I mean, I got, like, I won't say no support. Like one parent was really emotionally supportive. The other one was angry because I didn't become a school teacher, you know, so I kind of got cut, like, no, there was no support whatsoever when it came to doing this type of thing. I still hear about it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so it's, if you have kids that come from and that's not just about race, that's anywhere, right? But you do have disproportionately that a lot more in the Black community because of history. You hear about that with immigrants too. I mean, just where, no, we killed ourselves just to, you know, work this whatever job they had, and they said just to you be able to go to school, you're not going to do something in the arts. So I mean, it's about showing, like, outreach and showing them that there is an opportunity. Maybe if the money isn't there to pay for their apartment, but maybe there is a program where, like, exchange students, like, you know, how a family could take this person in. New York is harder, right? But maybe Maryland is not as hard for that. You know what I'm saying? It's cheaper,
right?
You know, where they could live there. I mean, the only thing is food is an issue and all that. But if you have a family that's got a teenager anyway, or a young adult, or they're just empty nesters, and that maybe want to have a young person there still, you know, it takes a special family to do that, I think, in the right scenario. But those are opportunities besides just having the grants to pay for their rent. There's other options, you know, or an internship that doesn't make them work 80 hours a week, something that allows them to have a part-time job too, because that's another issue. How are you going to ask somebody to work for free, basically, was a lot of today's internships are, which drives me nuts too, a lot of that. I'm like, no, you got to let this person go to a job too, so they can feed themselves or work on their own project as part of their growth as well, instead of actually just getting free labor, which a lot of them get it twisted and they end up using a person for a free, you know, 40 to 80 hour a week labor instead of an internship, and letting them go work a few days a week too. I don't know. That's another thing.
Well, this is incredibly helpful as advice, and I appreciate you both choosing to answer the question. I have one final question from the audience, and then I want to ask you both for your own thoughts. And this one is, do the presenters have any suggestions for those of us who are white to make a positive difference now and moving forward within our industry or outside of it? Which are the most respected organizations supporting Black Lives Matter and civil rights that you would recommend that this person and others would engage with at this point?
I would say talk to your friends, talk to your family more than, I mean, that's great to donate to, I'm not saying don't donate to organizations, but what's more important is listening. It goes back to the conversation of feeling discredited when you talk about a situation that happened to you and then somebody wants to talk about, oh no, well, you know, that happened in Mississippi. So they want to compartmentalize the experience. You can't do that. You know, or they want to say, well, slavery was a long time ago. You don't get to do that. That's the whole reason why we're in this problem. You have to just kind of shut up and listen for a second, you know, and just accept it, because that's the hard part, that nobody wants to accept it. And that's why they always come up with these rebuttals. But do that and then share that knowledge with your friends and family as best you can without arguments. That doesn't really help anyone, but you know, sharing does. Sharing, educate, learn, and share what you're learning with others. That's more important than donating to, I think. I don't know. And if you can do both, even better, you know.
Leon?
I don't have an organization to recommend, but I would say to an individual that African Americans face significant barriers at every societal level of American society, every level. And if you really believe in inclusion, then you have to be prepared to speak up honestly about including African Americans in all aspects of whatever you do, socially and professionally. Right now, we live in two separate worlds for the most part. The Kerner Commission told us that that's where we were headed in 1968, and we've played it out, and we do live in separate worlds. Some of the project that I'm doing now, when I'm interviewing, it involves white and black Americans. When I'm interviewing white Americans, I'm often stunned that I'm interviewing people of my generation and they never heard of the lynching at the time in 1955 of Emmett Till. Now, I remember I was 11 years old. That really struck me. And then seeing the photograph of him in the open coffin and what had been done to his face and head. That to me is amazing, but it really reflects, it's not their fault. I don't think it's their fault. It really reflects, to me, it reflected how separate are the worlds that we live in, you know, and I found that stunning. So I would just advise to be inclusive in all aspects of your daily life, professionally and socially.
Well, I want to just offer some feedback that I'm seeing coming in from social media right now, and that is a thank you to both of you for generously sharing your stories and deep knowledge. And, you know, to me and to ASMP, we need more of these candid conversations on race and just systems practices in our industry. And this person is pledging to engage with his white colleagues in doing their research and their homework and their educational learning on the subjects that we've been discussing. So I'm grateful for you both for having this impact on us all. And I wonder if you just, either of you or both of you, care to share any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, then I've gotten emotional a couple times too. So thank you. You keep saying thanks. I want to say thanks to you. I don't know what else to say to that.
Oftentimes we cannot have a dialogue, and I'm happy that we were able to have this dialogue. Because oftentimes one of the most difficult things in American society is a discussion of race between whites and blacks. Right.
No, that is, my dad's black and my mom's white. So this is where I have seen this the most. That's probably why Brown Passport was born also, because I feel comfortable sharing from a perspective with also thinking about both both sides, I would say. You know, I've had white cousins ask me, what was it like to grow up mixed? I don't know how to answer that, but I appreciated that he asked me that though. You know, and then I've had cousins on one side say some things are a little offhanded, and the same thing goes the other side. And I've had to sit up there and say, you know, that's not really the right thing to say. And because I'm their niece or daughter or cousin, they were listening, you know, on either side. That's happened actually. But if it weren't for that, maybe I wouldn't have, like, if you were white, maybe you wouldn't even hear some of the things that some folks in the Black community might say, and vice versa. You know, which is not good, because we should know what people are saying, which is hard. This one interview that I did in Brown Passport with these guys at the museum, that's one of the most powerful experiences that I had, was meeting this white guy and a Black guy, friends, like maybe 15, 20 years difference between them. But they talked about a safe space for tough conversation, which is kind of what Leon was addressing. You know, that all I could see was these two guys talking. And I was crying, thank God for autofocus on the Sony, but I was crying while interviewing them. And thank God I wasn't mic'd because of that, but you know, they were. But that, I won't get into it, because you could watch it yourself and see how they talk about. But it was really that it's a tough conversation, but that museum gave them kind of a safe space for it in a way, you know, but that has to happen.
And I hope that we've done that today. And I can't tell you again how grateful I am for both of you being willing to participate in the conversation and work with me to shape it today. It's been an extraordinary privilege to talk to both of you, and I thank you both very much.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for being with us today. We will definitely be figuring out ways and mechanisms to continue these conversations. And obviously, we're going to be continuing our town halls. So again, thank you all for participating today. And please stay safe, and please keep thinking and talking about all of this. So thank you.